Hey guys, tonight we wander slowly into the exhausting, beautiful, and deeply uncomfortable world of ancient Greece. A civilization remembered for marble temples, brilliant philosophers, heroic warriors, and the remarkable ability to treat unbearable physical suffering like a minor scheduling inconvenience. So before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow dives into the strange side of history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. It is always strangely comforting knowing people across the world are relaxing together while learning how ancient civilizations somehow invented democracy without first inventing decent mattresses. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. In ancient Greece, waking up refreshed was probably considered a myth invented by rich people. Before sunrise, entire households slowly creaked awake beneath the sound of coughing, stiff joints cracking, tired sighs, and someone muttering at the universe while trying to unfold their back correctly. Greek homes were not built around comfort. Most ordinary people slept on rough mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, reeds, or whatever vaguely soft material had not already been claimed by insects. During the night, the stuffing shifted into painful lumps that somehow targeted the exact parts of the body most responsible for happiness. Pillows existed, but many had the softness of folded bricks wrapped politely in fabric. If you woke up without neck pain or a shoulder that felt spiritually disconnected from your body, people probably assumed you were either wealthy or secretly favored by the gods. And then came the walking. Ancient Greece looked magnificent in paintings and modern documentaries. Sunlight shining across white temples, philosophers strolling peacefully beneath olive trees, dramatic mountain landscapes beside the sea. What those beautiful scenes rarely mention is that ancient Greece was essentially one enormous obstacle course made entirely from rocks. Sharp rocks, loose rocks, burning rocks, slippery rocks beside cliffs that looked personally insulted by human balance. Ordinary people walked almost everywhere because horses, carts, and servants were luxuries reserved for the wealthy. Most citizens traveled using thin leather sandals tied with straps that provided roughly the same protection as confidently believing your feet deserved better. Poor laborers often walked barefoot entirely, which meant cuts, bruises, cracked skin, infections, and splinters became permanent companions throughout life. Somewhere outside Athens, an exhausted farmer probably stepped on the exact same sharp stone every morning for 30 years, and eventually accepted it as a normal part of existence. Physical labor dominated daily life. Farmers bent over fields beneath brutal Mediterranean heat while carrying tools heavy enough to slowly destroy the spine over time. Fishermen dragged wet nets across rocky shores before sunrise while salt water dried painfully into cracked hands. Quarry workers carved marble beneath clouds of dust that coated their lungs like powdered stone. Blacksmiths stood beside furnaces hot enough to make breathing feel optional. Every hammer strike traveled directly into their shoulders and elbows until their entire skeleton sounded like collapsing furniture whenever they moved. And then there were the women, quietly carrying enormous physical burdens, while history mostly focused on writing poems about men holding spears dramatically. Women hauled water from fountains in giant clay jars balanced against hips and shoulders. They ground grain for hours using heavy stone tools that slowly damaged wrists and backs over decades. They cooked beside smoky fires, washed clothing by hand, spun wool, wove fabric, cared for children, and somehow kept households functioning, while society politely pretended this required no particular strength at all. Ancient Greece was built partly through philosophy and architecture, but mostly through exhausted people ignoring pain because survival did not pause long enough for complaints. If there was one body part ancient Greek life truly seemed determined to destroy completely, it was the teeth. Modern people panic if cold juice touches a sensitive tooth for half a second. Ancient Greeks regularly lived with mouths that probably felt like active construction zones. Bread formed the foundation of everyday diet, especially for poorer citizens. But flour was ground using heavy stone mills. Tiny fragments of stone constantly mixed into the flour itself, meaning every loaf came lightly flavored with microscopic gravel. Day after day, year after year, people slowly sanded down their own teeth while simply trying to eat lunch by middle age. Many adults suffered cracked teeth, worn enamel, infected gums, abscesses, loose molars, and missing teeth that disappeared one by one like soldiers retreating from battle. And unfortunately, dentistry barely existed in any recognizable form. Some people cleaned their mouths using cloths, herbs, ashes, or crushed charcoal mixtures. But real dental treatment remained limited mostly to enduring pain heroically until someone decided the tooth needed to be removed immediately with terrifying confidence. Ancient doctors suggested oils, herbal rinses, wine mixtures, and strange medical powders for tooth pain. Some genuinely helped slightly. Others sound like ideas created during a fever dream involving vinegar and confusion. One common belief claimed tiny worms caused toothaches, which honestly feels less ridiculous after enough sleepless nights spent holding your jaw in misery. And if the pain became unbearable, extraction followed. No anesthesia, no sterile equipment, just several people holding you still while someone inserted metal tools into your mouth and hoped determination would compensate for medical limitations. Somewhere in Athens, a philosopher was probably delivering brilliant speeches about morality while silently suffering through an infection powerful enough to alter his relationship with reality itself. Honestly, untreated dental pain may explain at least 20% of ancient philosophy. After enough nights awake with an abscess, anyone would begin questioning the meaning of existence. Ancient Greece also smelled far less majestic than modern imagination prefers. Films usually present clean marble cities washed in golden sunlight beside fresh sea air. The reality smelled more like smoke, sweat, olive oil, fish, wet wool, sewage, and a slow-moving public health emergency developing beside the harbor. Nearly every household depended on indoor fires for cooking, heating, and light. Homes filled constantly with smoke because ventilation remained poor and windows stayed small. Entire families spent years breathing soot inside cramped rooms where ceilings trapped heat and ash overhead. Women and servants suffered most because they spent the longest hours near the hearth preparing meals. Eyes burned daily. Throats stayed irritated. Chronic coughing became so common, people probably stopped noticing it entirely. By 40, many citizens likely sounded like exhausted goats every time they laughed, and the cities themselves only added to the experience. Markets overflowed with fish left too long beneath the sun. Livestock wandered through crowded streets, leaving behind biological opinions. Nobody cleaned quickly enough. Public drains worked inconsistently. Harbor districts mixed seawater with rotting cargo, tar, smoke from shipyards, spoiled food, and human waste dumped wherever gravity seemed convenient. Tanneries processing animal hides created smells powerful enough to emotionally damage nearby neighborhoods permanently. Blacksmith workshops filled the air with heat, ash, and metal dust. Potters worked beside kilns that transformed entire streets into giant ovens during summer months. Modern people imagine ancient civilization as calm and elegant because statues never show philosophers desperately trying not to inhale whatever was drifting through Athens that afternoon. Food itself created another constant struggle. Most ordinary Greeks lived in a state best described as permanently almost hungry. Not necessarily starving every day, though famines certainly happened, but carrying a constant low ache of appetite beneath daily life. Wealthy citizens enjoyed roasted meats, wine, imported fruits, honey cakes, fish, cheeses, and elaborate banquet feasts. Poorer families survived mostly on bread, olives, lentils, onions, figs, watered wine, and hope. Meat appeared mainly during festivals or religious sacrifices, meaning many people associated major celebrations with the rare opportunity to choose something that once had legs. Food shortages remained common because harvests depended heavily on weather, trade, war, and luck. One failed season could push entire communities toward disaster. Grain spoiled, fish rotted quickly in the heat, milk turned sour almost immediately. Families constantly worried about whether supplies would last through winter. Ancient Greek life involved an exhausting amount of quiet anxiety about food while still somehow finding energy to invent theater and argue passionately about politics. And then there was childbirth, perhaps the most feared experience in ordinary Greek life. Modern medicine has made it difficult to fully imagine how dangerous pregnancy once was. In ancient Greece, every birth carried genuine risk of death for both mother and child. Women gave birth at home surrounded by female relatives and midwives, while men waited outside attempting to look useful without actually helping very much. Labor could last for terrifying lengths of time. There were no antibiotics, no blood transfusions, no emergency surgery, no reliable pain relief beyond herbal mixtures, and prayers directed hopefully toward whichever god seemed least busy that day. Women suffered bleeding, infections, tearing, exhaustion, and complications that modern hospitals now handle routinely. In ancient Greece, those same complications often became fatal, and yet women were expected to continue daily labor throughout pregnancy almost until delivery itself. Carry water, grind grain, cook meals, wash clothing, manage the household. Ancient society basically looked at heavily pregnant women and responded, "Excellent. Please continue carrying large jars uphill." Despite all of this suffering, life continued forward with remarkable determination. Greeks still gathered for festivals filled with music and dancing. They still performed plays beneath open skies. They still argued about philosophy, politics, beauty, and the nature of justice, while half the population quietly limped from untreated injuries, and the other half tried not to cough directly into the communal bread. That may be the strangest and most impressive part of ancient Greece. Civilization advanced not because life was comfortable, but because exhausted people kept building, thinking, debating, farming, sailing, fighting, and surviving anyway. Beneath every great marble temple stood thousands of ordinary people carrying pain silently through the dust, hoping tomorrow might hurt slightly. But perhaps nothing revealed the brutal reality of ancient Greece more clearly than illness. Modern people often imagine sickness as an interruption to life. In ancient Greece, sickness was simply part of life itself, quietly waiting in the background like an unpaid debt the body eventually collected. Entire households lived one infected wound, one fever, or one bad winter away from disaster. A simple cough could slowly become pneumonia. A stomach illness could empty an entire family's strength within days. A small cut from a farming blade might swell, darken, and suddenly transform into a death sentence because invisible bacteria had entered the conversation thousands of years before humans even understood such things existed. Doctors existed, of course, though ancient medicine operated through a fascinating mixture of observation, confidence, herbs, superstition, and what can only be described as educated guessing performed with incredible seriousness. Greek physicians like Hippocrates attempted to study illness rationally, which was genuinely revolutionary for the time. They observed symptoms carefully and believed disease had natural causes instead of purely divine punishment. Unfortunately, natural causes were still poorly understood. Many doctors believed the human body depended entirely on balancing four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If one became excessive, your body essentially started behaving like a deeply emotional soup. Treatments focused on restoring balance through vomiting, bleeding, fasting, sweating, purging, or consuming herbal mixtures that probably tasted like punishment for offending nature personally. Imagine arriving exhausted with fever and chest pain only for a physician to announce very confidently that your black bile appeared spiritually overdramatic. Somewhere in ancient Athens, a sick man was absolutely handed a bowl of bitter herbs, while another exhausted patient nearby quietly wondered if perhaps dying naturally might actually involve less discomfort. And yet, despite the strange theories, some Greek medical practices were surprisingly advanced. Doctors cleaned wounds, used splints for broken bones, encouraged exercise, recommended diets, and sometimes recognized patterns between hygiene and health. They were wrong about many things, but they were trying sincerely to understand the body in a world without microscopes, antibiotics, or modern science. Honestly, humanity figuring out medicine at all feels slightly miraculous, considering most of history involved people rubbing leaves on infections while hoping optimism counted as treatment. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, became major medical centers across Greece. Sick people traveled long distances hoping for cures through rituals, sacred baths, prayers, and dream interpretation. Some slept inside temple complexes believing the gods would reveal healing visions during the night, which honestly makes sense when your alternatives included painful surgery performed by a sweating man holding heated metal instruments beside an oil lamp. Ancient surgery itself was terrifying. Surgeons treated arrow wounds, broken bones, dislocated joints, and battlefield injuries using knives, hooks, saws, and cauterization tools heated directly in fire. There was no anesthesia beyond alcohol, herbs, or physically restraining the patient while several nearby people tried not to faint. Speed mattered enormously because the longer surgery lasted, the greater the suffering and risk of death. Somewhere in Sparta, an injured soldier probably watched a surgeon approach carrying glowing iron tools and immediately began reconsidering every life decision that had led to this exact moment. And then there were plagues. Ancient cities created perfect conditions for disease. Crowded streets, Poor sanitation, contaminated water, livestock wandering near homes, insects everywhere, smoke-filled buildings with terrible ventilation. Illness spread rapidly once it entered a population. The famous plague of Athens during the Peloponnesian War devastated the city so badly that fear itself became part of daily life. People watched neighbors collapse suddenly with fever, thirst, vomiting, bleeding, and delirium while doctors died alongside patients because nobody fully understood how disease moved from person to person. Families abandoned homes. Funeral rituals collapsed beneath overwhelming death. Society itself began fraying under exhaustion and terror. Ancient historians described streets filled with smoke from funeral pyres, while survivors wandered through the city emotionally numb from constant loss. Civilization suddenly looked far less confident when everyone started coughing at the same time. Even mental health remained largely misunderstood. Anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, and emotional exhaustion certainly existed, though ancient societies described them differently. Soldiers returned from wars carrying invisible wounds alongside physical injuries. Mothers mourned lost children in silence because infant mortality remained painfully common. Farmers struggled through endless cycles of labor, drought, debt, and uncertainty. Slaves endured brutality with almost no escape from suffering. Philosophers debated happiness partly because ordinary life already contained enormous amounts of pain. Some Greeks believed emotional distress came from spiritual imbalance or divine influence. Others simply accepted sadness as unavoidable. There were no therapists, no antidepressants, no wellness podcasts explaining breathing exercises beside calming piano music. There was only endurance, community, religion, wine, conversation, and the quiet hope tomorrow might feel lighter somehow. Old age itself carried little romance. Modern people imagine wise elderly philosophers walking peacefully beneath olive trees, sharing profound wisdom with younger generations. Reality involved aching joints, failing eyesight, missing teeth, chronic pain, and bodies worn down by decades of relentless physical labor. Many people never reached old age at all. Those who did often carried injuries accumulated across entire lifetimes. Arthritises twisted fingers and knees painfully. Old fractures returned during cold weather. Hearing faded. Teeth disappeared. Walking became difficult. There were no retirement communities beside the sea offering yoga classes and soft blankets. Elderly people still worked when possible because survival required contribution for as long as the body allowed it. Somewhere in ancient Greece, a 70-year-old fisherman absolutely climbed onto a boat before sunrise, while his knees produced sounds normally associated with collapsing wooden furniture. And despite everything, despite the smoke-filled homes, infected wounds, broken bodies, dangerous childbirths, endless walking, hunger, disease, and exhaustion, ancient Greek society still created astonishing beauty. They built temples that survived thousands of years. They developed philosophy, mathematics, theater, literature, political systems, astronomy, and art that still shape the modern world, which honestly becomes even more impressive once you realize many of these achievements were accomplished by people who probably had terrible back pain while doing them. Plato was out here discussing the ideal form of reality, while somebody nearby definitely had a fever and a deeply concerning foot infection. Civilization continued forward not because ancient people lived comfortably, but because human beings remain strangely determined creatures even under miserable conditions. Perhaps that is the real story hidden beneath the statues and legends. Ancient Greece was not built by flawless marble heroes standing dramatically beneath golden sunlight. It was built by ordinary people waking up sore, tired, hungry, anxious, injured, coughing from smoke, and still deciding to continue anyway. Farmers still planted crops. Mothers still raised children. Sailors still crossed dangerous seas. Workers still carved stone temples beneath burning heat. Teachers still argued about knowledge. Actors still performed tragedies before cheering crowds. Humanity kept moving forward through discomfort so constant it became invisible. And somewhere beneath the stars over Athens, while distant waves rolled quietly against the shore, an exhausted Greek citizen probably lay awake on a terrible straw mattress, thinking,